Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
He is Dr. Austin Crow, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, assistant football coach over there too. How's practice going? How are the boys looking so far this year, sir?
Pretty good. I mean, as always, a lot of work to be done. I mean, it's always amazing how you can start camp and within 2 weeks you're scrimmaging and within 3 weeks you're playing a football game. So the first couple of days you're like, this is going to be a tough road to hoe here. Mm-hmm. But things come together and you get the leaders on the team that step up and play. And we certainly have some good athletes on the team this year. So a lot of expectations as always. But as always, you got to earn it on the football field. And they have a scrimmage this morning, so that'll be kind of the first step in that direction. And
good scrimmage, too, because you mentioned, was it Menominee, Edgar, and what was the other team for going on?
Medford.
Medford. Oh, my Medford Raiders. Come on now. On now. That's where I'm from. So we got there you go. That's a gauntlet right there. So shout out Coach Wilson over there. So, well, we got a couple things to catch up on, don't we, Austin? So Let's start off. Well, speaking of football, J.J. McCarthy is going to be out for the year. So we touched on it a little bit last week and said that we would know more after they kind of got in there and looked at it. Well, he's out for the year. So can you explain to us maybe what they found out when they were looking at his knee during surgery?
Right. So when we look at a meniscal tear, just a quick anatomy, the menisci, you have two of them. One's medial and one's lateral, which means inside and outside, basically. And they're kind of shaped like a C, and it sits between the two bones, so the femur and the tibia, and it acts like a shock absorber and a stabilizer to the knee. And when you get a tear, it often causes pain, sometimes catching, clicking, occasionally locking if it's a big displaced flap. Depending on the configuration of the tear, treatment can involve certain things. Sometimes you can actually treat them conservatively, so you try PT and rehab them, but if it's a full tear, it's uncommon that works well. In an acute injury, it's important to make that distinction. But there are patterns that you have to cut out and kinds that you can suture back together. Now, in the long term, it's obviously good to have as much meniscus as you can, so we always want to repair them if we can. The difference, though, is the initial recovery. So if you just trim out a tear, the athlete's able to return to activity very quickly because we don't really have restrictions because you're not trying to protect anything because all you did is cut out the tear. Conversely, if you suture it back together and try to get it to heal, you have to protect that. So in his case, they did find a tear pattern that was repairable, so likely what we call peripheral tear. And so the blood supply is better and the configuration allows us to put sutures across it. So in the long run, that's better news. In the short term, that means we got to protect the knee. Now, generally speaking, you're going to have them on crutches with some kind of limited weight bearing for the first 6 weeks, followed by another 6-week progression back up towards full go. So you don't really release them to full go till about 12 weeks. So if you do the math on that, that's 3 months essentially is when they begin full go. So to get back and play in the NFL, to go from part activity level, I guess, like partial activity level to full go, it's tough. So often those athletes, they just say, look, if you're going to try to come back for the last, couple weeks of the season, it's just not worth it, especially at a position like quarterback where he's going to be drinking from a fire hose, right? Just trying to learn to be an NFL quarterback. So they just opted to say, look, you're done for the season, which I think is very reasonable as opposed to try to force him in towards the end of the year. So long story short, it was a repairable pattern, which is good. In the long run, in the short term, it obviously killed the season. So it's kind of a blow for us, but it was hard to say what he was going to mean for the Vikings this season. He had his bright moments in some of the preseason, but it's hard to say what that was going to lead to. And so it may be better for him in the end to have a whole nother year to develop, but obviously we won't know because that was forced one way or the other.
So from what and maybe I read it wrong, it seemed like he reported knee pain, was it the next day or so? So is that kind of similar to a meniscus tear? I mean, it almost reminded me a few years ago when Brian Balaga tore his ACL at family night. He didn't know about it till like the next day when he had some discomfort. Is that something that's common with these type of injuries, that maybe you don't know anything's going on till maybe the next day? I don't know if it's adrenaline or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the severity of the injury. I mean, if you have a real severe twisting injury, or especially a contact injury, I mean, those ones are obvious. But you can get where people will step funny and kind of have like a weird little shift in the knee. I will say most athletes do come in and say, I felt something happen, and they know right away. But you will occasionally get someone who's like, I don't know. I mean, I might have dinged up my knee, but I don't know. And they come in, the knee swollen, and it feels funny. And you're like, well, I think you might have sustained a big injury. But that's definitely less common. Generally, people know. Now, a meniscal tear is certainly less severe than a ligament injury. A ligament injury generally requires a lot more energy to go through the knee to tear a ligament as opposed to a meniscus. So you can get more subtle ones, but even so, usually people can pinpoint when it happens. So my guess is, he had a couple plays where he scrambled, maybe where he was hit after a throw. I don't recall a play that looked like he came up limping at all, but my guess is he kind of did something to it, quote unquote, tweaked it, probably shook it off and said, I think I'm okay. And you're right, the adrenaline carries you through. Next morning you wake up and say, ooh, that is sore. Mm-hmm. And then, boom, there you are getting worked up for a tear.
Now, with this type of repair, now, is there any concern about, because I think, we've talked so much about knee injuries in the last couple of years here. Mm-hmm. Is there any long-term concern about that? I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier, really good blood flow to that. So I got to imagine that's got to be key to that recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah. So unfortunately, the healing rate is not 100%. So there are some that will re-tear or not heal correctly. That can happen, depending on the tear pattern. There's some that we fix and you walk out of the surgery saying, look, I'm almost certain that one's going to heal correctly. And there's some where you're saying, geez, I'm going to cross my fingers and hope. Obviously I was not in his surgery, so it's hard to say for sure. But in this type of situation, my guess is if they repaired it, they felt there was a high probability of success. And then beyond that, one of the big kisses of death with any knee injury or any joint for that matter is cartilage injury. Mm-hmm. And so I will say that an isolated meniscus tear, uncommon to have an associated cartilage injury with it. Now, ligament injury is a different story. So the fact that he did not tear an ACL or another ligament in the knee, that bodes well for him long-term as well. So if this is truly an isolated meniscus tear and it heals, hopefully he'll put this behind him and have a great rest of his career and never have a knee problem again. That's a real possibility.
Another player we talked about a couple weeks ago was Christian Yelich, with his back injury, and at that time elected to not undergo surgery. And we you threw out some possibilities and such. Now he announced yesterday that he was in fact going under surgery for his back, that it wasn't kind of healing, the right way and such. So does that kind of give you any thoughts potentially what it could be, the fact that they tried to rest it and the fact that it wasn't getting any better and now they have to have surgery? Does that give you any clues to potentially what might be going on?
Yeah, I'm still leaning towards like a disc herniation is the likely culprit here, but it's hard to say for sure. So, another quick anatomy, we have your spine and there's the vertebral bodies. Sitting between each vertebral body is a little cushion called the disc. And the disc has basically a ligamentous, fibroligamentous layer around it that keeps it in place. Well, if there's an injury to that, some of the disc material can herniate out, or what's called a disc herniation. And that can cause direct pressure on the spinal cord or more likely some of the traversing nerve roots. And that can cause pain in the back and symptoms down the leg. We call it radiculopathy. People also call it sciatica type pain. Long story short, often we try to rehab those because sometimes the disc will resorb. In fact, often it will, depending on the size of the herniation. So, first step is absolutely avoid back surgery because you don't want back surgery if you don't have to. But sometimes those herniations are big, cause a lot of symptoms, and you just keep fighting the fight and they're not going away. And I would guess he's probably had serial MRIs, so he's probably had a couple that have looked at it and said, look, this herniation is not getting smaller, it's not resorbing, this is likely going to remain symptomatic, so they've opted for that. Is it possible that it's a bad facet or it's a pars defect or some other less common thing, and he's getting a fusion? Maybe, but I think this sounds like it's going to be a microdiscectomy type procedure based on the timelines they're kind of throwing out in what he's been going on. So that would be my assumption. Obviously, they haven't said, because I was reading and looking, I did not see anywhere, unless you saw something, what kind of back surgery, but I'm guessing it's going to be a microdiscectomy for a disc herniation.
So is there any like type of fusion that would go with that, like a Tiger Woods fusion, sort of thing, or? Yeah,
not if you can help it. So Tiger Woods ultimately had a fusion because he had a couple of the microdiscectomies, and each time you lose some of the disc material, that's the cushion. So as you lose it, that level becomes degenerative and arthritic, essentially. So in a first-timer like this, it's very, very uncommon to go directly to a fusion. Now, again, there are other things that do go directly to fusion. So if he has, again, like what's called spondylolisthesis, so like a bad pars, or he's got a slip where it's moving forward, those are situations where sometimes they'll get a fusion right off the bat. But I just, in a young athlete like this, I would be surprised by that. This is much more likely going to be a simple like incision. They go down, they remove the disc material, and then get away, and they try to use minimally invasive as possible. They're able to do it in much smaller incisions and violate the muscle to a lesser degree than the old school days. So I think he'll bounce back. But back surgery is always significant surgery, no question. And you can't rush back, because if you do, it can create irritation, and you don't want the disc to re-herniate. So there is a window where they don't allow him to return to high-level activity. So that's likely what is going on. Maybe they'll disclose it at some point. We'll know for sure, but that would be my guess.
He's 32 and he swings a bat for a living. I mean, I'm nervous about, I know he said 100% getting ready for, the goal is to be 100% for next year, obviously. But, I mean, knowing his job is swinging a bat for a living and running around in the outfield, and you're having back surgery, I mean, is there a concern, considering, he is in his 30s, and I know it's not old, but, baseball and his profession, is there a concern that this could affect his career, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is rotational forces on the back are harder on the disc than straight loading. So that's why, like a guy like Tiger Woods, that's why he probably had that happen to him, because that rotational force. There's clearly similar mechanics with swinging a bat and swinging a golf club, that torsion on your spine. So yeah, I mean, it could be a recurrent issue. I wouldn't say I would expect it. I would say odds are in his favor. But could this become a recurrent problem and something that affects him long term? Absolutely, it could. I would imagine that that's going to be, quote, unlikely, but it wouldn't shock me if it ends up having an issue down the road again later. And it depends on the size of herniation. He may have already lost a good amount of disc material, and he may be heading down the path of a degenerative disc, and that could become a problem in itself. So essentially developing some early arthritis in his back. But as you put it, when we talk in the relative terms of age, 32 is relatively old for a baseball player or pro athlete, but in run-of-the-mill people, that's still relatively young. So his ability to heal should be high, and I would hope that he doesn't run into long-term problems.
Last question for you here, Austin. Really quick, I want to go back to football. Justin Herbert, he's been dealing with plantar fasciitis, and he's got a boot and all that, but I mean, we haven't really heard a whole lot. We haven't really seen a whole lot from him. Is this something that could affect him throughout the regular season, or is this? And what else can they do? Is it just pretty much resting this thing, and that's the recovery for this?
There are some other treatment options. So I mean, they can do like ultrasound shockwave therapy. You can do PRP injections, steroid injections. You can actually do surgery on it, which they'll certainly want to avoid at all costs. So it's not like this will be a permanent career-ending type issue, but could it nag him this season? Absolutely. I mean, I bet you have a bunch of listeners right now that have had plantar fasciitis, and it sounds like it's not a big deal. As someone who personally had it once, it is not fun. I mean, it's like, it can be bad. Like, I mean, it can be like every step hurts, and it doesn't truly weaken you, but when it hurts that bad, your body splints itself, and so you go to push off, you just can't push off with the same force. So it affects your performance, absolutely. So, it sounds like they're progressing him out of the boot from what I understand, so he's probably going in the right direction. But if it doesn't go away and kicks in, I mean, when does he rest it? He can't. I mean, because rest isn't like a couple days. I mean, rest is generally weeks or a month. So, to get this to go away, I mean, they're really crossing their fingers this completely burns itself out before the season. If it does, he'll be good to go. If it doesn't, you better believe it's going to affect him all season long. And so he isn't the world's most mobile quarterback, but he does move around the pocket a little bit, and I think that would affect him. So I'm guessing they threw the kitchen sink this, so it is possible he even had something like shockwave, or he had something like PRP. Those are all possibilities because they're not like an invasive procedure like surgery would be. But yeah, I mean, the hope is it doesn't affect him. He's obviously one of the young, bright spots in the quarterback position in the NFL, so you hope he can have a great season. But yeah, this is something that we'll have to see how it progresses. And luckily, it's not going to be, again, a career-threatening type thing, but it can be a season-aggravating type thing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He's Dr. Austin Crowe, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. Dude, appreciate the time as always, man. Best of luck to Regis at the scrimmage today, although there is a Medford connection, not only with the team. I know one of the assistants at Menominee is a former Medford Raider, too, so we got a lot of connections over there. That'll be good.
It should be good. I mean, it'll be good. I think all the teams should, have good. And it's just so early in the year. I mean, there's a lot of guys who are working themselves out on the roster, and it's a chance to go prove yourself. I mean, I'm sure you can remember back to your days playing. It's always exciting, nerve-wracking, all at once. You're going to go out there and try to prove to the coach that you got what it takes. But I wish them all the best, and most importantly, stay healthy. So
yes.
I don't want to see anyone in my office.
Exactly. Well, best of luck to your son, and you guys have a fantastic weekend, and we'll catch up again soon, okay, bud?
Absolutely. Take care.
You got it. Dr. Austin Crowe, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine